There's a kind of grief that people don't talk about very much, not because it's rare, but because it often goes unnoticed. It's the kind of grief where something real has been lost, but no one around you treats it like it's a real loss. You're hurting, but you feel like you have to hide it, or explain it, or justify it. And after a while, you may even start questioning yourself, why is this hitting me so hard? Or should I even feel this way? If that's where you are, there's actually a name for this. It's called disenfranchised grief. And once you understand it, a lot of what you've been feeling will start to make more sense. My name is Eddie Trauber, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And for over 30 years, I've worked with people who feel stuck in grief and don't always understand why. And one of the most painful forms of grief I see is the kind that no one else seems to recognize. Because when grief isn't acknowledged, it doesn't just hurt, it isolates. So in this video, I want to help you understand what disenfranchised grief is, why it feels so heavy and confusing, and what you can begin to do to process it in a healthy way. Disenfranchised grief is grief that is not openly acknowledged, supported, or validated by others. In simple terms, it's grief that doesn't get permission. Not from society, not from the people around you, and sometimes not even from yourself. This can happen in a lot of different situations. Sometimes it's because of the relationship. An ex-partner, a complicated relationship, or someone you love deeply but others didn't fully understand or like. And sometimes it's the type of loss. A miscarriage, the loss of a close pet, a job or a role that meant more to you than most people realized. And sometimes it's because of stigma, loss connected to an addiction, suicide, estrangement. Losses where people don't know what to say, so they end up saying very little or the wrong things, or worse, they minimize it. You might hear things like, well, at least it wasn't fill in the blank, or it probably wasn't meant to be, or you'll get over it, or you'll move on. And even when those aren't meant to hurt, they land in a very specific way. They send a message. This shouldn't affect you as much as it does. So what do most people do? They start pulling back. They stop talking about it. They grieve privately. And over time, that grief doesn't disappear, it just goes underground. And this is where it starts to get more complicated, because grief isn't just emotional, it's neurological, it's relational. It's something your nervous system is trying to process. And one of the primary ways we process grief is through co-regulation. Being with someone who can acknowledge your pain, who can stay present with you, and who can help your system to settle. But with disenfranchised grief, that piece is often missing. So your system stays activated, or it moves towards shutdown. You might notice feeling numb, or feeling stuck, or frozen, or feeling like the grief just keeps looping over and over again. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your grief hasn't been witnessed. And grief that isn't witnessed often doesn't move. So what do? When your grief hasn't been acknowledged, how do you begin to process something you've mostly had to carry on your own? It starts in a different place than most people expect. One of the most important first steps is simply naming what this is. Not just grief, but this is disenfranchised grief. Because when something has a name, it starts to come into focus. Instead of, why am I reacting like this? It becomes, this makes sense given what I've been carrying. And that shift matters. Because confusion keeps you stuck, but clarity gives room for movement. The second step toward healing is learning how to validate your own grief, even if other people don't. That's not something most people are used to doing. We're wired to look outward. We look for cues. We look for permission. We look for someone else to say, yes, this matters. But with this kind of grief, that permission often doesn't come from other people, So part of the work becomes internal. Statements like, this mattered to me, or this relationship mattered, or this loss changed something in my life. You just acknowledge it honestly, because your nervous system doesn't process loss based on what other people think. It processes loss based on attachment. And if there was attachment, there will be grief. The next step is to begin finding safe places for your grief to be seen. That doesn't have to be a large group. Usually it isn't. It might be one trusted person, a counselor, or even writing it out in a structured way that you're the only one who reads. The key is this: your grief needs somewhere to go where it's not dismissed. Because even small moments of being understood start to settle the nervous system. Not all at once, but gradually. And that's how healing tends to work. Not in big, dramatic releases, but in small, steady shifts. One of the reasons this kind of grief feels unresolved is because there's often no clear ritual around it, no gathering, no acknowledgement. So sometimes you have to create that intentionally. Writing a letter, setting aside time to reflect, marking the loss in a meaningful way. Not to hold on to the pain, but to honor what mattered. We recently lost our family pet, Maverick, who had been with us for over 10 years, and it meant a lot to all of us, but especially to one of my daughters. And we had Maverick cremated, and we had his ashes, and she asked if we would wait until she came home for the holidays, and then we could go and spread his ashes. And we did. So she and I went out into our front yard where he loved to play and just took some time and reflected on him, talked about him, and we were able to scatter his ashes there. And that was very meaningful to both her and I. So marking the loss in a meaningful way really matters. Not to hold on to the pain, but to honor what mattered. Because when something is honored, it becomes easier for your system to begin letting it shift from grief and loss into health and healing. There's also a spiritual layer to this, because just like people, you may wonder if God sees this kind of grief, if it counts, if it matters. And throughout Scripture, there's a consistent pattern. God responds to what is unseen and overlooked. Not just the obvious suffering, but the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't get acknowledged. And nothing about your grief is invisible to him. Even the parts you haven't been able to explain, even the parts you've quietly carried, those are not overlooked, they're known. If this is the kind of grief that you've been carrying quietly without much support, then it makes sense that it feels heavy. Not because you're stuck, not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're carrying something real without enough space to process it. And the shift towards healing doesn't start by forcing yourself to move on. It starts by allowing it to be real, giving it language, giving it space. And over time, that's what allows it to begin to move. If this video connected with you, I want to point you to another video that will help you take this a step further. It's called Why Grief Feels So Lonely. Because a lot of what you're experiencing here overlaps with that sense of isolation. And understanding that piece more clearly can really help you move forward. I'll link that for you here. Remember, take this one step at a time. You don't have to rush it, but you also don't have to carry it without understanding it anymore. If you have any questions about grief, anxiety, addictions, or other mental health struggles, post them in the comments and I'll try to address them in future videos. See you next time.